Tales of Amestralia. The Ascension of Kuzala. Presentation. This book is a write from the year 3E3120, written by Yando Laudarvo, a historian born in the city of Noki. The purpose of this writing is to tell the story of a woman named Kuzala Wondaike, who lived during the second half of the 28th century of the Third Era. Kuzala Wondaike was a rokkalomian librarian, archaeologist, and explorer who became one of the most intriguing and mysterious figures of the 28th century archaeology, although she only worked as an archaeologist and researcher for 5 years. This writing was prepared based on historical findings related to Kuzala over the last 300 years, including diaries, notes, archived books, archaeological records, library records, popular mentions, reports and rumors about Kuzala, her existence and her trajectory throughout history. First years. On the 10th day of the 4th month of the year 32760, a girl was born in the city of Rokkalomian, in the Central Lands, and was named Kuzala Wondaike. Kuzala was a child with black hair and bright yellow eyes. Her father, Joan Wondaike, was a well-known shoemaker in Rokkalomian, while her mother, Amestralia Wondaike, was a skilled cook who helped the family's income by preparing cakes for sale. Kuzala had 2 older siblings and a younger sister. The family's eldest son, Jarko, worked with his father to learn and eventually inherit the profession of shoemaking. Denise, the eldest daughter, followed in her mother's footsteps and was dedicated to the art of cooking. However, Kuzala had different interests. Joan, her father, was a literate man, and so Kuzala, like her siblings, was taught to read and write by him. From an early age, Kuzala developed a taste for reading and frequented the library of Rokkalomian whenever possible to delight with the books available. Kuzala had a special predilection for fantasy story books, her favorite being the tale entitled The Journey of Friol. This book told the story of a young adventurer in search of a magical treasure to the legendary Black Gulf, facing several monsters and wild creatures along the way. From childhood until her early teens, Kuzala loved to fantasize that she herself was an intrepid navigator, sailing the seas in search of lost treasures. Kuzala's favorite treasure among all the stories she read was the famous elixir of immortality, discovered by Friol during his exploration in the Black Gulf. It was a magical red stone that gave its bearer longevity and immediately healed all his wounds. Kuzala was so immersed in her fantasies that it was common for her parents to scold her for not doing her chores and spending too much time in the library. Unfortunately for Kuzala, her peaceful life changed direction when she turned 15 years old. With Kuzala and Denise, who were 17 years old, being old enough to marry, Joan, their father, found a pair of brothers who were interested in his daughters and intended to marry them. Joan informed his 2 daughters that they would be courted by the brothers Kodajok and Capio, from the Yavurim family. Denise was happy with the news, as since she was 13 she had intended to get married and have her own family. However, Kuzala didn't like the news at all and tried to reason with her father, Joan, but he insisted that she should spend time with Capio, even if she didn't intend to, as she should get married and have children as customs dictated. Kuzala was furious with her father's decision and begged her mother for help in the matter. Amestralia, however, agreed with Joan about Kuzala getting married, as it was part of the culture and cycle of life in Rokkalomian that from the age of 15 a girl should enter the courtship phase to eventually get married and have children. Kuzala told her mother about her dissatisfaction with the situation and that she did not want to follow this path in her life, but her mother told her that there was no choice. Joan, who was a man who rarely changed his mind, would not allow his daughter to spend her life reading books until she became a stranded old woman. Kuzala did as her father ordered and spent a few afternoons talking and walking with Capio Yavurim. Her younger sister, Amestralia, who was also her main confidant, had a diary where she constantly practiced her writing. According to the writings in her diary, Kuzala liked Capio enough not to hate him, for he was a good boy with good intentions, but she didn't want that life. Kuzala didn't accept that her life was limited to just living in Rokkalomian as a family mother. Kuzala wanted her fantasies to become real. She wanted to travel the world, explore dangerous and unexplored places, cross the mountains of Valvalor and see the Shadowlands. No matter how good Capio was, staying by his side would make her have a life of regrets, and Kuzala would not accept spending her entire life in this condition. At the age of 16, Kuzala entered a phase of enjoying reading historical books, no longer tales, books that told real stories with documents, mentions, testimonies and maps that proved the veracity of the journeys described in the books, whether these journeys were carried out by those who wrote or by third parties. In one of these books that Kuzala enjoyed reading was the one called The Dungeon of Godas. Kuzala read in this book about the journey of a man called Maviuspo Pustsa, an archaeologist, an explorer who led a group of 8 explorers that traveled to the vicinity of the city of Ramo. According to the book, 10 miles southwest of the city of Ramo, there existed a dungeon known as the Dungeon of Godas, a dungeon designed by, and built on behalf of, Sambag Godas, a lord who ruled the region from around 3E2126 until the year 3E2154. Godas gained a lot of power and prestige in his time, as he possessed a mythical magical amulet called Amulet of Atanziga, a relic that he inherited from his father, Zalmur Godas, who was a great explorer and navigator who found the precious amulet in the regions of Suliut, in the Shadowlands. The Amulet of Atanziga, an amulet that according to history, grants the bearer some magical powers, the power of fluctuation, the power of illusion and the power of metamorphosis. When Godas became ill, around the year 32147, and not trusting his sons and daughters to inherit his precious amulet, he ordered to be built a large dungeon so he could rest in peace knowing that no one would be able to steal his miraculous amulet and his glory would forever remain exclusively his. Over the centuries many tried to break into the dungeon to steal the amulet of Atanziga, but no one had enough power to overcome all its challenges. The Dungeon of Godas became a feared and respected place by the local population and by explorers and archaeologists who over the centuries saw thousands of very competent people enter the dungeon, but never make out of it. According to the book The Dungeon of Godas, from the year 3E2492, a society of treasure hunters from Ramo began to study the dungeon. Many hunters entered the dungeon and analyzed the challenges, the traps and the enemies that were found within the place. Over decades dozens of hunters died trying to understand the traps of the dungeon and fighting the enemies. In the process, they managed to gather a series of information that indicated how to overcome the dungeon's layers, the floors, from the first floor to the 8th floor. Unfortunately for this society, it ended in the year 3E2603 without being able to overcome the dungeon, only being able to reach the 9th floor. The notes recounting the process and analyses carried out over the years were hidden in a secret library hidden in the depths of an old building in the city of Ramo, a building that served as the headquarters for the society between the years 3E2535 and 3E2603, for 73 years until it was discovered by members of the governance of urbanism of Ramo in the year 3E2676 during a demolition. The notes were archived in the library of Ramo the following year and were available to anyone who wanted to study them. A group of Ramonian treasure hunters began a new series of studies of the notes in 3E2693, but did not attempt to overcome the dungeon. 3 years later another group tried, but only reached the 5th floor before giving up on continuing. In 3E2711, a group of 11 adventurers entered the dungeon and none of the members were seen again. Finally there was the group of Maviuspo Pustsa, native of the city of Turgo, who began investigating the dungeon in 3E2736 and carried out 2 expeditions in the year 3E2738, where both times the team managed to reach the 9th floor. Unfortunately, due to lack of knowledge and resources, 7 of the 12 researchers died in the attempt to overcome the 9th floor and after the large number of deaths, the other members of the group ended up giving up on continuing. A smaller expedition took place in the year 3E2740, and with the help of a legend from the history of exploration, Stokan Cherno, a Pavitskan born in 3E2701, the tenebrous 9th floor of the dungeon was conquered. Unfortunately there was still the 10th floor, and in an attempt to overcome the last major challenge Stokan Cherno ended up passing away, and after this disaster, Pustsa decided to put aside the Dungeon of Godas and changed his focus to other projects. Maviuspo Pustsa retired in 3E2744, without him or any member of his team having managed to overcome the unforgivable 10th floor and thus failing to overcome the infamous Dungeon of Goddaz. After retiring as an archaeologist, Pustza dedicated himself to writing some books telling about his explorations. He published the book The Dungeon of Goddaz in 3E2754, where he told everything he knew about the dungeon and how to overcome all the challenges up to the 9th floor. Kuzala was extremely enchanted by the information cited in the book, about the history of Sambag Goddaz, the centuries of deadly trials and errors, and the decades of studies and attempts by various teams to try to overcome the deadly challenges of a terrible dungeon, something that seemed to come out of a tale, but was real. Kuzala was inspired by the content of the book and began to imagine herself exploring the place. However, her enthusiasm for stories of exploration and dungeons full of lethal traps did not please her parents, who wanted her to focus on getting married and having a traditional family. This difference in thought and priority caused the family to have several discussions over the following months. Kuzala, who knew herself well enough to know that she would never be content with an ordinary life, secretly began to plan a way to leave her parents' home and go live somewhere else. During New Year's Eve celebrations at the end of 3E2776, Kuzala met a young man named Samson Nishimarov, described in one of her diaries as a man with short black hair and dark green eyes, a native of the city of Turgo, but who had an accent more typical of the city of Saros. Samso was a student at the School of Archaeology of Turgo and had many tastes in common with Kuzala. She was positively intrigued to discover someone with similar interests to hers. The two became great friends very quickly, and Samso mentioned that Kuzala, as someone who liked exploration, should enter the School of Archaeology of Turgo. Kuzala mentioned to him that she did not have the money for that and that her parents would never allow it. After the festivities, Samso returned to Turgo and Kuzala continued her peaceful life in Rokkalomian for a few more months. Her father Joan, in the second month of the year, set the wedding date for his daughters, which should take place at the end of the fourth month of 3E2777. Kuzala was greatly disgusted at having to marry someone she didn't love and live a life she didn't want. As a result, arguments increased within the house, and when Kuzala was only a month away from marrying Capio, she herself made the dangerous decision that she would not stay in Rokkalomian to get married. For months Kuzala helped the librarian responsible for organizing the books in the library of Rokkalomian, an old lady who had mobility difficulties, and with this she earned some coins that she carefully saved. Her plan was to use this money to get a trip to Turgo, where she planned to meet Samso and get some work so she could enter the School of Archaeology of Turgo. With a week to go before the wedding, Kuzala managed to find a carriage that would take up to 10 people on a trip to Turgo. Kuzala paid half the cost of the trip in advance to ensure that the coachman would wait for her before leaving, and used the remaining 2 days to spend with her family. In the meantime, Kuzala wrote 3 letters that she left under her bed the night she left hiding. One of these letters was written to her sister Marvia, another was written to her fiancé Capio, and a final one was written to the rest of her family. In 2 of them, Kuzala described how she felt partly bad for not being able to meet her family's expectations and said that she would follow her own path even if this path did not end where she wanted, because at least this would be the path she chose. The other letter was to Marvia. This was a letter where, according to Marvia herself, Kuzala thanked all the support that Marvia gave her over the years and that as soon as she could she would return to take Marvia with her to her new life. None of the 3 letters have been found by historians over the years, only written mentions in diaries. Kuzala left her house in the early hours of the morning with the clothes on her back and a backpack containing a spare set of clothes, some blankets, and the little money she still had. Kuzala was at the western gates of Rokkalomian when the carriage passed with the passengers. Kuzala got into the carriage and moved on to her new life.